For more than 2 decades, the Harry Potter films seemed to have no more secrets left to give. Fans had memorized every line, every spell, every glance between Harry and Hermione. But behind the magic and the laughter, there were things the cast never spoke of. The quiet pain of growing up under a spotlight, the accidents that nearly changed everything, and the small human moments that slipped through the cracks of fame. Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, Rupert Grint, they lived through it all, long before they had the words to explain what it really cost them. And only now, years later, are they revealing the truths that no fan ever figured out. The weight of the wand. When Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone arrived in UK bookstores in June 1997, it wasn't expected to change the world. The first print run was just 500 hardback copies, small, forgettable, the kind of release that might slip quietly into library shelves. But within months, J.K. Rowling's story of a lonely boy discovering he was a wizard began to spread like wildfire. Teachers recommended it to reluctant readers. Parents started reading it aloud to their children and found themselves unable to stop. By the time the new millennium arrived, Harry Potter had done something few children's books ever could. It united generations. Bookstores turned into gathering places, and the world fell under a single spell now known as Pottermania. Then came the news that changed everything. Warner Brothers was turning the phenomenon into a film. For millions, it was a dream. For 3 children, it was destiny and a burden. Daniel Radcliffe was only 11 when he was chosen to play Harry, a character already loved by millions. Overnight, he became the face of a legend. "It was terrifying," Daniel later said. "I didn't understand why everyone was looking at me like I was Harry Potter. I was just a kid. Emma Watson, 10 years old, and ambitious but inexperienced, burst into tears when she got the part of Hermione. I knew my life would never be the same," she admitted years later. And Rupert Grint, red-haired, witty, and warm-hearted, found himself typecast as the comic relief before he even understood what fame meant. "I was the funny one," he said quietly, "but sometimes I felt like I disappeared behind the laughter." The magic they created on screen came with a price behind the scenes. Long shooting hours replaced childhood play. School lessons were squeezed between takes. Privacy was gone. Everywhere they went, strangers called them by names that weren't theirs. Daniel once confessed he couldn't walk through London without hearing, "Look, it's Harry," whispered behind him. Even at home, the line between fiction and reality blurred. When The Sorcerer's Stone premiered in 2001, fans screamed their names, flashbulbs burned their faces, and the trio smiled through the chaos. But behind Daniel's nervous grin, his mother leaned close and whispered, "Just breathe." He did, not knowing that moment would define not just his youth, but his entire life. The wand he carried on screen was pretend. The weight it represented was not. Growing up inside Hogwarts. By the time The Chamber of Secrets hit theaters in 2002, the cast of Harry Potter had crossed an invisible line. They were no longer children playing characters. They had become their characters. The castle halls, the Great Hall, the endless staircases, those weren't just film sets anymore. They were home. "We spent more time in those hallways than in school," Emma Watson later admitted. "Sometimes I'd forget who I was supposed to be, Hermione or myself." For Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint, and Emma, childhood was no longer measured by birthdays or summer holidays, but by shooting schedules and release dates. The audience saw magic. The cast lived exhaustion. Days stretched into nights under studio lights. Private tutors replaced classrooms. Their friends became their co-stars, and their memories were forever tied to scripts and cameras. "It was like living inside a bubble," Rupert Grint once said. "You never really stepped out of Hogwarts, not even when the cameras stopped." But the magic that enchanted the world often carried real danger behind the scenes. In 2004, while filming The Goblet of Fire, Daniel Radcliffe nearly drowned during the underwater challenge sequence. He accidentally gave the wrong hand signal to the safety team, indicating he was out of air. Within seconds, divers rushed to pull him up. It was one of those moments when you realize this isn't just acting, it's real life, Daniel recalled. Though no one was hurt, the fear lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling. As the films progressed, their tone began to mirror the growing pains of the young actors themselves. Director Alfonso Cuarón's Prisoner of Azkaban in 2004 marked a turning point. Gone were the bright, childlike colors of early Hogwarts. In their place came shadows, mood, and emotion. Cuarón encouraged the trio to explore vulnerability and internal conflict, to feel what their characters felt. For the first time, the story wasn't just about wizards and monsters. It was about adolescence, loneliness, and the cost of growing up too fast. Tom Felton, who played Draco Malfoy, later reflected on that shift. "We started as kids pretending to be wizards," he said. "By the third film, we were confronting things we didn't have names for: anger, jealousy, guilt." Acting had become therapy in disguise, and though the fans saw wonder and magic, the young cast was quietly learning that innocence was the first spell they would lose, and one they could never get back. The shadows behind the fame. By the mid-2000s, the Harry Potter phenomenon was no longer just a cultural event. It was an unstoppable empire. When Goblet of Fire premiered in 2005, ticket lines wrapped around city blocks and headlines called it the biggest movie event of a generation. But behind the glittering lights, Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, and Rupert Grint were beginning to suffocate under the weight of their own success. "We couldn't walk down the street," Daniel said years later. "People didn't call me Daniel anymore. They called me Harry." What had started as a dream come true was slowly turning into a lifetime sentence of fame. For these young actors, the physical and emotional toll was immense. They filmed for months without proper breaks, balancing schoolwork between takes and trying to keep up with the expectations of a world that refused to let them grow in peace. 13-hour days were normal, Emma Watson recalled. "We didn't know any different." Behind her calm professionalism, she was breaking down. "I felt lonely," she admitted. "Everyone thought we were living a fairy tale, but most days it felt like survival." Rupert Grint shared the same exhaustion. "You grow up in front of the world," he said. "Millions of strangers think they know you, and somehow you start losing pieces of who you really are." In 2006, tragedy struck when Richard Harris, the beloved actor who played the original Dumbledore, passed away. His death was a shock that rippled through the entire production. Daniel, who had formed a special bond with him, said quietly, "He treated me like a grandson." When he died, it felt like Hogwarts itself went dark. The studio replaced him with Michael Gambon, but for the young cast, that change was a harsh reminder. Even in the magical world of Harry Potter, nothing stayed the same forever. As the series continued, the fame only grew, but the joy began to fade. Endless interviews, photo shoots, and the pressure to stay perfect left the trio exhausted. They smiled for cameras, signed autographs, and answered questions about happiness, while inside, they were just trying to hold themselves together. Daniel later admitted that during this time, he began to fear the one thing he could never escape: that his real life might never live up to the story that made him famous. The price of magic. As filming for Half-Blood Prince and Deathly Hallows began, the line between the wizarding world and reality blurred completely. The cast was now in their late teens, carrying the final chapters of a story that had defined an entire generation. But behind the fantasy, the risks grew more real. In 2009, Daniel's stunt double, David Holmes, suffered a life-altering accident during a flying sequence. A controlled explosion went wrong, and David was left paralyzed from the chest down. The crew fell silent that day, a reminder that even in a world built on illusion, danger was painfully real. "He was my friend," Daniel said later, visibly emotional. "It changed how I looked at everything we did after that." Despite the tragedy, David's courage became a symbol of resilience for everyone on set. That same year, the set of Hogwarts Castle caught fire during a pyrotechnic rehearsal for the final battle. Over 100 crew members fought the flames as headlines screamed, "Hogwarts burns!" No one was hurt, but for many, it felt symbolic. The castle that had sheltered them since childhood was literally disappearing before their eyes. Emma Watson later reflected that these years were the hardest. "We were saying goodbye without realizing it," she said. "Every scene felt like a farewell." Rupert Grint confessed he struggled to imagine a life beyond Ron Weasley. "It was like watching the door close on my childhood," he said. For Daniel, the burden of fame was already taking its toll. In later interviews, he revealed how he turned to alcohol to cope with the anxiety of living under constant public scrutiny. "I was afraid to be seen as anything but Harry Potter," he admitted. "I didn't know who I was without him." The world cheered for the magic. But behind the cheers, the cost of growing up inside it was finally catching up with them. The secrets we missed. When Deathly Hallows. Part 2. Premiered in 2011, it felt like the end of an era, not just for the fans, but for the people who had lived inside that story. Millions cried watching the final scene, but none more than the actors themselves. "It felt like a funeral," Emma Watson said. "We had built a world together, and now it was gone." In the years that followed, the cast began to open up about the hidden truths fans never caught. Daniel Radcliffe revealed that Harry's signature gesture, pushing his glasses up, wasn't in the script at all. His glasses simply kept slipping. "It became part of the character by accident," he said. Rupert Grint shared that most of Ron's nervous laughter and awkward pauses were improvised. "That's just how I am," he laughed. Emma admitted that the infamous moment when Hermione hit Draco in Prisoner of Azkaban was supposed to be a light tap, but she accidentally punched Tom Felton for real. "He was such a good sport," she smiled. Years later, Emma would confess she'd had a crush on Tom during filming, something fans had long suspected but never confirmed. "Nothing ever happened," she said, "but there was a spark." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The girl who spent years hating Draco Malfoy on screen had secretly adored him off it. Meanwhile, one of the most powerful secrets belonged to Alan Rickman. Long before fans knew the truth about Snape, J.K. Rowling told him the full story, that Snape loved Lily Potter. Alan carried that secret for years, using it to guide every glance, every pause, every flicker of emotion. After his death in 2016, Daniel said, "Now I understand everything he was doing." He knew the ending before any of us. Watching his scenes today feels different. Each silence, each restrained look suddenly feels like grief, disguised as discipline. The legacy that still hurts. The years after Harry Potter were bittersweet. The trio finally stepped out of Hogwarts, but the world never stopped calling them back. Daniel devoted himself to stage work and indie films, chasing the sense of identity he lost. Emma turned toward activism and education, later saying, "Hermione gave me a voice. I just had to learn how to use it for myself." Rupert retreated from fame altogether, living quietly in the English countryside, occasionally returning for small projects, but always keeping distance from the spotlight. Even the supporting cast carried their share of memories. Tom Felton spoke openly about battling addiction and depression in the years after the franchise ended, saying the pressure of being the villain everyone loved to hate followed him for years. Matthew Lewis, who played Neville Longbottom, once said, "It took me a decade to stop being that awkward kid." The magic had made them immortal, but it also froze them in time. Meanwhile, J.K. Rowling herself revealed how much planning had gone into the smallest details. She explained that Tom Riddle's diary was the first Horcrux all along, that Harry's ability to speak Parseltongue was proof of the fragment of Voldemort inside him, and that the invisibility cloak's appearance in the very first book had been foreshadowing the Deathly Hallows from the start. Even the names, Lupin, Sirius, Malfoy, were clues hiding in plain sight. Every detail meant something. Every choice had a purpose. But for the people who lived it, the meaning was more personal. The castle had burned, the lights had dimmed, and the children who once wore robes and wands had become adults, scarred, grateful, and changed forever. The magic was real, Daniel said in a 2025 interview, but it came with a price. We didn't just play those characters, we became them. Even now, after all these years, the Harry Potter cast keeps revealing stories that remind us the magic wasn't just on screen. It was in the people who made it, in their laughter, in their heartbreak, in the growing pains they shared with us. So tell me, which behind-the-scenes secret surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us next time for more untold stories from the world you thought you already knew.